Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Okay, it's been a while since I've done a reading vlog or a recent reads video, so I thought that I would just sit down and talk about the books that I've been reading recently. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you all about the books I've been reading, if I've liked them or if I haven't. I do kind of want to preface this by saying that I feel like I'm sort of in a phase where I'm being more critical of the books that I'm reading, and I don't know that this is a phase or if this is just permanent or temporary, I don't know, but I definitely am finding as I'm reading there are certain things that stick out to me that I'm not as easily able to just sort of like push aside and get lost in the story. Like, so things in the writing are kind of bothering me that are making me not enjoy the story as much as I want. So if it sounds like I'm being picky in these reviews, like, I am aware of it. I am aware of it. It's not something that I'm like intentionally doing, but I feel like this may be a result of being in that huge reading slump where I just feel like everything that I'm picking up, if it's not like completely bowling me over, I am definitely being a little critical of it. So I don't have any 5-star reads to talk about today, but I think I have some books that I have some hopefully interesting things to say about. Anyway, that was enough of an intro. Let's go ahead and get into the books. So the first book that I want to talk about is Carnal Urges by J.T. Gessinger. I'm not sure how to say her last name. This book has been extremely hyped. I feel like everyone, except for a few people that I know, have read and loved this book, like loved it, gushed about it. And so I have been very, very hesitant to read it because usually when that happens, specifically with a dark romance or mafia romance, I find things that don't work for me. And I don't know why that is. It really bugs me, but that is sort of what happened here. Sorry, I have a hair in my face, but I did really end up enjoying this, and I don't do half-star ratings anymore, but I feel like if I did, this would definitely be a 4.5. So the basic premise of this plot is we have Sloane, who we saw in the first book in this series, which the first book I rated 3 stars. I liked it, but I didn't completely love it. It felt very insta-lovey to me, so I definitely had more hopeful expectations for this one because I had heard this book was better, and it definitely was. Like, it was, for me, it was much, much better. This book was really, really fun. It sort of reads a little bit like a rom-com in a way, a mafia rom-com, which I was not expecting. I've never read anything like that before, and I did really enjoy my time reading this book. So it's basically about Sloane, our heroine, who is a sassy woman, and I think that sometimes that type of heroine can be a little abrasive, and it's not necessarily the type of heroine that a lot of people like, but I just absolutely loved her. She was the star of this book for me. She had such clever remarks and comebacks and things to say to Declan, the hero, who is part of the Irish mafia. He kidnaps her because he believes that she's responsible for starting this mafia war and killing his men and things like that. So it is a captor-captive romance, and honestly, like, from the beginning, even from the first book where we saw Sloane and Declan, like, I knew she was going to be a firecracker, but I was very pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed her character. She was so ballsy, just so fun, just completely a ball buster, honestly, but also, like, she had a lot of depth to her too. I felt like her character was definitely not one note ball buster type of woman. Like, she had depth to her, which I really, really, really loved. So her and Declan have a lot of chemistry, like tons of chemistry, and their banter, their back and forth in the first half of the book was just like chef's kiss, perfection. If I could rate the first half of the book, it would be 5 stars, 100%. But then, as sometimes happens for me, once they had sex and once like that part of their relationship was like solidified, all of the tension sort of dissolved, and it definitely felt like Declan went from not liking her to really liking her to being infatuated with her to desiring her and wanting her to then once they had sex he was just like immediately in love with her. And I've noticed this is a pattern that this author does, that she did in her first book, where she really leans into insta-love quite a lot. And honestly, for me to really love insta-love, it has to be a very specific way, and I don't exactly know what that is, but it doesn't always work for me. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen in real life, because I know it does, but I don't love it when there's so much tension built up, so much chemistry, so many sparks, and then all of a sudden they have sex and it's like, I love you now. And I don't love that personally. So that sort of dimmed my enjoyment. I felt like the last half of the book was quite a bit slower because that element was gone. And there really wasn't anything progressing their relationship other than, like life and death, kidnapping, and things like that. But it just didn't hold my attention the way that the first half of the book did. And I found myself a little bit bored. And at that point, I really wasn't invested in their steamy scenes either. It was just sort of like, you got her. So, I kind of had lost interest at that point. So that really was my major gripe with this book. But there was also something else that is going to come up in another book that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And I've noticed that this is something that really dims my enjoyment of books when it shows up. This also happened in a Devney Perry book. I think it was Indigo Ridge. And it's when a plot point is sort of like created, or a potential plot point is created that has like this intrigue around it. And so I'm always like very excited when that happens, because I'm like, awesome, you are introducing this sort of mysterious plot point element, and I'm very excited to see what you're going to do with it. It doesn't always have to be mysterious, but there's something about the plot that is introduced that is like interesting. And in this case, it was something with Sloane's health, and I was like, interesting, how's that going to happen? And then it really bothers me when plot points get introduced like that, and then they just sort of dangle and nothing is done with them. And I definitely feel like that happened here. It happened in Indigo Ridge a little bit, and in another book I'm going to talk about. So that was another thing that really sort of made me disappointed when I finished this book, because I felt like, you introduced this plot component of the plot. It was going to be interesting, and then they didn't do anything with it. So like I said, I'm being picky about this. I see why everyone loves it. This romance was really, really fantastic. I really loved, like I said, the first half. The tension was fantastic. I really loved their chemistry. But then once they consummated it, I was much less invested, because it was very insta-lovey at that point. So I give this 4 stars out of 5 stars. But I think it's a very high 4-star. And honestly, I would recommend this to anybody. I think that the issues that I had with it are probably very specific to me, but if the premise sounds interesting to you and you like that type of heroine, and also the hero is super protective, very, very, very into the heroine, we love that, so I think you would probably super love it. So anyway, okay, 4 out of 5 stars for that one, a high 4-star. So then the next book that I read is Reaper. This is also a mafia romance. I had been hearing a lot of buzz about this, a lot of people really, really loving it. This is actually the second book in the series, and I didn't read the first book, and I do think that it probably would have helped me enjoy this book more if I had. This is a case where I was just like, screw it, I'm just gonna go into this right now. And then I was kind of regretting that decision, because I definitely felt like there was some character development that I didn't get in this book that I'm assuming happened in the first book. So this is about our hero. What's his name? Okay, his name is Ronan. So the hero's name is Ronan, the heroine's name is Sasha. He's basically been built and created, trained from the very, very, very young age to be an assassin, to be a killer, to be a mindless killer. He obviously has had a lot of trauma that has happened in his life, and he is then basically this man who, isn't really sort of projects this image of someone who doesn't feel, someone who doesn't experience deep emotions, almost like an automaton, like a robot type of guy, type of hero, which, to be quite honest, I kind of love that type of hero. And so, but he focuses in on Sasha. There's something about her that he just, loves and wants and desires, and he just is, fascinated with her. And I love that. That's catnip for me. That is a weakness of mine. I dearly, dearly love that. So Sasha is our heroine. She is working in a strip club. Her mom is dying of cancer. She's got a lot of dark and traumatic issues in her life as well. And I do feel like that was a little bit something that sort of made me enjoy this a little bit less, is that I felt like it was sort of like a kitchen sink of trauma. So many things were added into this to create drama, to create damage, to create darkness in their backstories, and I personally prefer when that is handled with a little bit more selection and care, I feel really weird talking about this in this way, but I just don't love it when I feel like our characters are just given trauma, all of these things, because it just seems, at that point, it makes it difficult for me to suspend my disbelief. Not that that doesn't happen, but it just seems really all of these things. Okay, anyway, so that's a nitpicky thing with that I had with that sort of dimmed my enjoyment. So this book took me a while to get into, and it is a beautiful romance. It's all about, like Sasha ends up having to be protected, and Ronan is extremely protective of her, and I love it so much. Like, this book had major touch her and I'll kill you vibes, which I love very, very much. Very much enjoyed that. The first half took me a while to really get on board with their romance, just specifically involving their intimate scenes. I was just sort of like, I don't love this. This is giving me the ick. He is a virgin hero, but their first sex scene was very uncomfortable for me, and not because he was a virgin hero, but I just didn't really love the way that it went about and how things resulted from that. But I kept reading, and I really ended up enjoying their romance in the end. And it's almost specifically because of how protective the hero was. Like, he was so protective of her. Really, really, really did not want anything to happen to her. Just a thing of beauty. And I honestly, that really won me over a whole lot in this book. So I gave this book 4 stars. It's a solid 4-star, not like a high 4-star or anything. It was a 4-star. Took me a while to get into it, but once I did, I was very invested in their romance and really enjoyed it. So that was a good one. Okay, and the next book that I read is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. So this book was, as most of you probably know, this was all the rage last year. Like, I could not open a book platform, Bookstagram, TikTok, BookTube, without hearing about this book. And I honestly have had a lot of misses with Tessa Bailey's books in the past where they just haven't really landed for me. So I was very hesitant about this book. But I did get the arc for the second book, which I actually ended up reading and enjoying more than this. I loved the second book. It's a delightful Friends to Lovers. I really, really enjoyed that. I gave it 4 stars. So I was hesitant about this. So once I read the arc for the second book, her new release, and I enjoyed it so much, I was like, I think I'm going to give this one a shot. And so I did. And I was very underwhelmed with this book, honestly. Like, I don't know if I had read this before I read Hook, Line, and Sinker, if I would have liked this better. I'm interested. I'm kind of curious to know what would have happened if I had actually read these in order. But I felt like, for me personally, this didn't live up to the hype. I felt like it was very, very average, honestly. I really didn't love their romance at all, and the heroine, specifically Piper, was so unlikable and so insufferable, and I just could not be bothered to care about her poor little rich girl problems, honestly. I just was like, meh, like, I just don't care. I just don't care. And I loved the hero, however. So if you don't know what this book is about, it's basically sort of like a rom-com type of thing, very steamy. And she is this wealthy socialite who ends up in jail, and her stepdad is like, oh no, I'm going to cut you off, and sends her to work in her, I think it's like her actual dad or maybe granddad, I don't know, somehow a relation of theirs, dive bar up by the coast. And so that's her punishment. And that's where she meets this bearded fisherman. And he's very swoony. He is a widow, and he is sort of trying to come to terms with that, and he's super attracted to her, obviously, and it's their romance. And I just didn't love it. I was wanting to be wowed, but again, I feel like this is a case where the hype really got to what I had expected, and I definitely was expecting something different than what I got. I felt like this was pretty surface level. I don't really feel like this reached any super great emotional area for me. But also maybe that was mostly just because Piper honestly annoyed the crap out of me. I could not tolerate her. I sped through the last little bit because I'm just like, I just cannot handle you. You are literally one of my least favorite heroines I've ever read. So 3 stars for this one. I think it was a fun read. It just wasn't anything special for me, Okay, and then I read The Proposal by Mary Bellog. This is a historical romance. Obviously, it was the book for our Rake Appreciation Society live show in March, and I loved this book. I love Mary Bellog. I love her writing style. She is a very she builds her stories very slowly. She's very character-driven. She's very subtle, and her books have a lot of nuance that I dearly love. And I feel like every time I read one of her books and I go to something else that doesn't have that same level of nuance, I'm always so disappointed, Even though this book doesn't necessarily have a huge fast-moving plot and the romance itself is very slow burn, it's just full of these really beautiful moments that are just so, like, epically human, I feel like, that are so relatable on any level. I just love how Mary writes about people in sort of ordinary circumstances, showing these ordinary moments in their lives and finding this beautiful human moments in all of that. I really, really loved it. I felt like it was fantastic. We have a whole live show dedicated to this book. It's just a few videos back on my channel, and I loved it. I gave it 4 stars, but again, this one is a very high 4-star. Like, I think that because Mary's books are such slow building reads, there are definitely times where I don't necessarily feel, like, I wouldn't call this a boring book for me. I enjoy this writing style, but there are definitely times that it feels definitely slower, and maybe I would like a little bit more interaction between the characters progressing their relationship, but I just loved it so much. It was such an enjoyable read, so that's sort of why it's not quite a 5-star, but it was still fantastic. Loved it so much, and very excited to finish the series. Okay, now the next book that I read is A Daring Arrangement by Joanna Shupe. This is actually the first book that Joanna Shupe had published through Avon. This was her Avon debut. Her Regency romance series came before this. It wasn't published by Avon. I believe that was published by Zebra. So I've been really interested to go back and read this series. I've read almost her entire backlist at this point, but I haven't read this series. So this book is a Gilded Age romance. We have an English heroine in America, and her father is basically telling her, you have to marry, and I'm gonna pick the man for you, you know? But she is in love with an artist back in London, and so she is hoping that if she sort of ends up picking this man to be her husband without her dad knowing, if she picks this man who is like the most debauched, the most scandalous, the most, you know, a very inappropriate match for her, then her dad will be like, what, you know what, go ahead and marry that artist. And so she picks this guy, our hero, who is that to a T. Like, he's very much a damaged hero. He is a scoundrel, and he's drunk, and, you know, like, he's not a stand-up guy that the dad would want his daughter to marry, you know? So she picks him, and it's basically, so a marriage of convenience, fake relationship, and I just felt like the romance just left me wanting. I just wasn't super invested in their romance. I just sort of felt like I kept waiting for sparks to happen. I kept waiting for feelings, for me to feel something for this couple, and I just sort of didn't. It felt like it relied very much on that plot device of the fake relationship, which, to be honest, felt a little flimsy for me anyway. It just seemed like, do you really think that's gonna work, girl? Like, do you really think that's gonna work, you know? And then also there was, this is the book I was talking about earlier, when a plot point was introduced, something that seemed like mysterious and dark surrounding our hero's past and what happened to him and why he is the way he is now. I was very excited to see where she was going to weave that in and how that was going to come to fruition in the end. And it felt, again, like it was sort of left a little bit dangling, a little bit unsatisfying, and I know I'm being very vague, but if I tell you specifically, it will be a spoiler. But it had the potential to be a very interesting plot dynamic, and then it just wasn't used. And so that's really becoming something that irritates me in books, when something is introduced to be a very intriguing plot point, and then it is not utilized, or it's easily resolved, and I'm just sort of like, you know, you had my interest. It just feels a little bit like a tease. Like, you had me intrigued, and then you didn't deliver, and I'm disappointed. So that's going to be reflected in my rating. So I gave this book 3 stars. You know, Joanna Shupe's writing is solid. It was very easy for me to get into. I was invested in the story, but at the end I was just sort of like, oh, it was a little underwhelming, you know? So 3 stars for this one. And then I read How to Be a Wallflower by Eloisa James. So this book is Eloisa James' new release. This comes out March 29th, so I believe next Tuesday. And I had a ton of fun reading this. This book it features characters from My American Duchess, which was very fun, so we get to see the Duchess and the Duke in this book, which I really loved. And I really thought the premise of this was very fun and very exciting. We have our English heroine, who is the granddaughter of a Viscount, and she is basically the heiress of basically a toilet fortune, you know? Which was very unique. And she is wanting to buy this, like, costume designer's shop and sort of save it so it can stay in England, because the owner wants it to stay in England. So our hero, Jake, is an American man, and he has come to England to bring this costume designer to America to help further his, like, business of all of these theaters and things like that. Like, he is a businessman, he's wealthy, and he wants to further that along by bringing this specific person back. So they definitely have an antagonistic relationship in the beginning where, you know, they both want this costume shop. She ends up actually securing it first, and he's a little bit miffed and is like, how am I gonna, like, beat this woman? And then they end up working out this bargain where she will design clothes for him to wear, because he's like, I'm gonna get the ugliest clothes design from this costume shop, and then nobody's gonna want to come and shop here, and this business will go under, and then I'll prove you wrong, you know. And she is basically makes the deal with him that he can design her gowns and everything to be a wallflower, because she doesn't want to marry. She is about to have her first season. She doesn't want to marry. She wants to be independent and keep her fortune and everything like that. And so he ends up designing her clothes, and it was just very, very fun. This was a very low angst book. It was very fun. I thought the characters were great. Eloisa James' writing just really shines and sparkles. It was very witty. They had great banter, great dialogue. Like, I just really love it. And I felt like they had really great chemistry too. You could just totally feel the attraction between them. And I think that I did give this book 4 out of 5 stars. And I think that's largely because I wanted the third act conflict to sort of take up more space. It was very easily resolved, and I kind of wanted Jake to work or grovel for her in a way, but also it felt a little bit like Jake went very rapidly from being antagonistic towards her to being convinced he was in love with her. So very, very small gripes. I would say this is a high 4-star, 4.5 star probably, but overall, like, my reading experience of this was just so delightful. This was just such a fun, enjoyable, good time. I really, really loved it. I loved my reading experience of this. It was just at the end, I had a few things that I'm like, it wasn't quite perfect, but it was really fun. I thought it was delightful. Okay, and the last book that I read was not a romance, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway, and it is Watership Down by Richard Adams. I have 3 editions I had to come and show you. This was the first edition that I bought when I was 14 years old. And it's definitely got yellowed pages. It's got cracked spine. This was brand new when I bought it. This is probably my most reread book. It is a favorite of mine. It's a classic. I love this book so much, and I used to reread this book every year until I kind of got to the point where I'm like, okay, I could tell you this story literally from beginning to end, and I took several years where I didn't read this book at all. I think it may actually even have been It's been probably close to 10 years since I've read this book. I'm 40. I found this book when I was 14, and it has been a favorite of mine ever since. I just love it so much. So the reason that I picked this up, look, I have this beautiful illustrated edition. Let's see if we can find a pretty picture. There's this one. Can you see it? Shine. Okay. This is one of my favorite books, and I'm going to tell you about it. I got this edition also, which is a little underwhelming, but it's the 40th anniversary. I don't know. Penguin, you could have done better with that cover. Anyway, so the reason that I picked this up is because I had heard Sophie Lark say in an Instagram post, which I have since not been able to find, I'm not sure if she took it down or what, but she said that when she was writing The Savage, which was her newest release, she was sort of using inspiration of how this band of rabbits was put together for how Adric's wolf pack was put together in The Savage. So that immediately piqued my interest. I feel like not a lot of people that I talk to on BookTube or Bookstagram have read this book. Some people don't even know what it is. It's definitely a little bit of a, not like a cult classic, but I feel like it's just not talked about very much. It was written in 1972. It's been around a very long time. But I was intrigued about that. So I read The Savage. I enjoyed that immensely, specifically the wolf pack. I really liked how those characters were built and how everyone was brought together. Like, that was probably my favorite part of the whole book, specifically a character named Jasper. I just was very invested in the wolf pack. So I thought, you know what? I've been slumpy. I really want to reread Watership Down, and I have the audiobook. This is a new audiobook production that was just released after the Netflix show came out, so just a few years ago. I'd never listened to it before, so I listened to it, and I was just captivated. I was completely captivated. It just reminded me of why I love this book, like how this story has always resonated with me so deeply, and I just had the best time. It was 5 stars. It will always be 5 stars. I feel like this is such a compelling story. And like I was talking to Jen from the Book Refuge we talk about the books that we read every day on voice messages, and I was like, I've been stuck just reading this book for like 3 days and then reading and watching any YouTube videos I could find about reviews about this because I just find myself completely sucked into this world. This feels to me just like a deeply imaginative, cleverly built fantasy world, but it's about rabbits in the natural world, in our world. There's nothing fantastical about it other than you're reading this from their point of view as they leave their home warren that is under threat of danger to travel and find a new home. It's basically just a survival story. There is a war with another warren of rabbits, and honestly, the thing that I love the most about this is the characters. I feel like they're so unique, so clever. I feel like this book is so deeply human, and the way that these rabbits talk about humans in the world and humans' interaction with the natural world has always been very compelling. I'm a huge animal lover, but this doesn't read like a typical anthropomorphic animal book. You know, like these are rabbits behaving like rabbits with sometimes something that approaches like a human level type of thought. They're not like humans dressed in people clothes. They're not like rabbits dressed in people clothes walking around pretending to be humans, you know? It's such a fascinating story for me. I honestly adore it. I think it's fantastic. It's a classic for a reason. It's utterly compelling. It's haunting. It does have a happily ever after. It's dark. Like, I don't know. It is just one of my favorite books of all time. I just read it and I had to tell you about it because this has been on my mind so much. One of my favorite books ever. I just absolutely adore it. I think that it's fantastic storytelling, honestly. It's just a completely compelling story about these rabbits. I don't know. If you've read this book, please let me know down below because I don't know if anybody is even still watching this because this isn't a romance, but like, man, the chokehold that this book has on me since I was 14 years old has never gone away. I freaking love it. The thing that I love the most about this is how like it's almost like allegorical, but the author has said so many times, he's like, I did not write this as anything other than a tale of rabbits. And I'm like, oh no, you didn't, sir. Like there's so much in here that is just deeply human and that is a parable for how humans live their life. And I just love it. There's a line in here, something that says about how humans go around and they destroy the world. They will not stop until they've destroyed the natural world. They kill things just because it's in the way. That's what's happened with their home warren in the beginning is a construction site is coming through to build homes, and so it destroys it and kills these rabbits, except for the ones that got away. And the rabbits are reflecting on that, and they're like, humans will stop at nothing just to, if we're in their way, they're just going to kill us. And it just like makes me really think about my interactions with the natural world. And I don't know, it's thought-provoking. I can't stop thinking about it. It's a compelling story. It really gets you in the heartstrings. And there are points of this book that I think are just absolutely chilling because you're reading the survival story of these rabbits. And so it feels like you're constantly being hunted too. I don't know, man. I don't know. I love this book a whole lot. I just had to talk about it because I reread it. And my love for this book is as strong as it was when I was 14. So, all right. There you go. Those are the books that I've read recently. I would love to know if you have read anything really fantastic or anything that was really terrible. Let me know down below. And if you want to just leave me an emoji, how about you leave me a bunny emoji? Okay? That would be fantastic. That would be fun. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I'll see y'all in my next video.